Hello, and welcome to Lay of the Land, a podcast from global law firm K&L Gates, where we discuss the latest thinking, new developments, and best practices in today's real estate industry. We hope you enjoy this discussion. Please reach out to suggest topics or guests, or with questions about real estate law.
Hello, and welcome to the Lay of the Land podcast. I'm Alex Kaplan, real estate partner in K&L Gates' Washington, D.C. office, and I'm joined by my colleague, Heather Horowitz, real estate partner in our New York office. Good morning, Heather. How are you?
I'm great. How are you, Alex?
I'm doing great. Thanks so much. On previous podcasts, we've explored challenges facing the commercial real estate markets in Washington, D.C., and how public and private actors are navigating those challenges. To drill down on a project that has sustained tremendous success in recent years, we're excited today to discuss the Wharf. The Wharf is one of the largest real estate projects to be developed in Washington, D.C. over the past several decades. Without attempting to be comprehensive, the project features nearly 1 million square feet of Class A office space, approximately 1,400 residential units, 4 hotels, and over 100,000 square feet of retail space. The Wharf has reshaped D.C., revitalizing the previously underdeveloped waterfront and attracting high-quality tenants to a new part of the city. To discuss how the Wharf is thriving in challenging times in the real estate markets, we're happy to be joined today by Andrew's son. Andrew is the president of District Wharf Properties, which operates the Wharf as a joint venture between the property's developers, Hoffman and Associates, and Madison Marquette. Andrew, welcome to the podcast, and thanks so much for your time. We really appreciate it.
Thanks for having me.
Of course. So before we get into the weeds on the Wharf, let's start with you and your career path. How did you first become involved in D.C. area real estate investment and development?
Yeah, unfortunately, there's not like a great story. It was kind of by happenstance. I graduated college in 2009 during the recession, that recession, and was in D.C. and through somebody I knew from college, I got a job at JLL. Now, interestingly, though, the first job was not in what I do now. It was in something fairly niche. It was military housing. So I worked with JLL, helping to oversee the Army and Air Force's privatized family housing portfolio. So a little bit unique, but that's how I got involved and kind of propelled me to where I am today.
Interesting. And I mean, if you had to sort of connect the dots between, where you started with military housing and what you do now, I mean, is it just been sort of a series of evolutions? What's sort of the connective tissue that you see sort of throughout that path?
Yeah, I guess like the great thing was like for those 2 years that I was at JLL doing military housing, we were doing real estate. It just was like through a very different lens. And so we were executing deals, right? We were getting $300 million of equity commitments from the government and the local developers. We were negotiating loan documents. We were building pro formas and, reviewing plans. And so all the things that you'd see in a project like the Wharf, we were doing, albeit on a much different scale and like a different product type, because obviously you're building like sometimes townhomes, but mostly single family homes. So it was a great way to get started at a time when there weren't that many real estate jobs available. In fact, the cohort of people who started working in real estate in DC in 2009 and is still doing it is very small. I'm reaching my 15th year of doing real estate in DC. And again, so definitely a sinew that's really brings everything through. But like it was a great testing ground to see if I like real estate and to learn the skills to do what I do now.
Well, Andrew, that's great. And I would certainly second, I feel like the longer I do this work, the more I learn that the real estate community can actually be pretty small when you get down to it. Speaking though of the work that you do now, when you come in the morning, get to your desk, kind of what's the first thing on your list for the day, or what's usually at the front of your mind when you sit down and start to manage your day?
Yeah, actually, like for me, the first thing I do is I'll try to absorb as much news as possible. No, I'm like the first thing I do when I wake up is like I'll listen to NPR as I get ready. But like it's just getting all the information. Obviously, national, international news, which will affect the markets in certain ways, like understanding what's going on in like the financial markets for the day, And then when I get to my desk, I specifically try to focus on what's happening in the real estate community. Obviously, BizNow does a really good job of aggregating all the big news. And so really it's about absorbing as much information as possible so that I can, so that I'm up to date. Now, of course, that's assuming there aren't active deals that are working on that may or may not be blowing up at the time. But, it's really absorbing that information. Typically, I'm sitting in meetings all day, so don't have a ton of time to stay up to date on the news. So that's what I do.
Sure. No, that makes sense. That makes sense to be kind of the first kickoff to get all the information you can and kind of go from there to move throughout the day. I think it's great advice. Alex, did you want to kind of drill down on the wharf?
Yeah,
Sure.
That's what I really want to get into here, because it's a fantastic property. I know I've been there. I've gone out to dinner with my wife there. It's really a great property. I'd love to really spend some time drilling down in some detail on it. So to start off, I gave a very brief overview. Like I said, it was not a comprehensive overview of all the property's features. Can you just describe some of the wharf's unique elements in greater detail so that everybody kind of has a picture of what this thing really is?
Sure. So the project itself is 3.5 million square feet of development. It sits on 27 acres of land. And uniquely, we are on the banks of the Washington Channel in the Potomac River. And we also control 50 acres of riparian rights. So think about a mile-long stretch of land. So it's quite narrow. 3.5 million square feet on 27 acres. And there's a very unique waterfront which has some 400 boat slips. So pretty unique when you look at it, especially in DC. Now on site, we have some 17 acres of parks, open spaces, and civic areas, which includes 4 public use piers. Indeed, if you look at the website and the big events that we do, you'll see there's giant piers that are full of people. And so, it's very reminiscent of what you'd see in Europe and other sort of countries internationally. We just uniquely have here in the nation's capital, the front step of DC.
Cool. And, speaking historically a little bit, obviously, you guys have an unparalleled location, but we all know a ton of real estate development projects may have great locations. They seem to have everything going on, and they don't pan out for whatever reason. If you could sort of go back into the history a little bit, maybe it's recent history, maybe it's deeper history.
Yeah.
What was it that made the Wharf successful where so many projects don't achieve success, especially when you consider the fact that, to my understanding, the Wharf was initially conceived before the financial crisis. It weathered the financial crisis and then came out as successful development on the other side. Can you just sort of speak to what made the Wharf work?
Yeah, and it's a good question because the truth is it wasn't a foregone conclusion that this project would actually ever be executed, and certainly not to this level of success. So Hoffman Associates, then P. and Hoffman, originally won the project with Struver Brothers. Unfortunately, Struver Brothers did not make it through that recession, and so it was Madison Marquette who joined later on, who coincidentally was in second place in the RFP process, and so Hoffman and Madison took the project through entitlement, and ultimately PSP Investments was brought in as the equity partner. Now, through that process, we're talking about a great number of years before we started construction in the 2014 timeframe. It took vision first, right? Monty Hoffman's vision for this project, and later Amr Hamor, the chairman of Madison Marquette, to come in and have the vision to be able to do it. Then you have to have the expertise to be able to do it. And again, having Madison, Marquette, and Hoffman Associates partner together, bringing different expertise to the project, provided the technical expertise to be able to execute the project, and the tenacity. I mean, the fact that they can weather, the 2008 crisis, later COVID, which I'm sure we'll get to, and to sort of end up where we are today, where the project's effectively done, and now we're at a stabilized point. So vision, tenacity, and the expertise is what brought it together. Now, another big component of this here is that we've got partners in the government that helped make this happen. So another unique element to this project is that we have a 99-year ground lease. We have as part of the capital stack, a couple of hundred, close to a couple $100 million of TIP pilot proceeds. And so again, like private development, and yet we have partnerships with our state, our DC government. And so again, a lot of people in it to make this project very successful.
Can you speak more to the partnership with the local government? Because, again, we all know a bunch of projects where, these things turned into political footballs, and getting the partnership with the local government is difficult and sometimes even winds up derailing the project. How do you guys make that work? Sort of, what's in it for DC that they were willing to work with you guys to make this happen? And how do you sort of work with them on a day-to-day basis to continue the success?
Sure. The vision started very early, and even before the developers were involved, it took 4 acts of Congress and 8 separate DC council approvals to lead the way to actually do this development. And so let's just say there was a lot of buy-in from the beginning, from the federal and local government to make it happen. So we benefited from that. On an ongoing basis, I mean, there's, as you can imagine, a lot of interaction with DC in a lot of different areas. So, very plugged in what happens with DemPed. We obviously interact a lot with OTR, though that relationship is slightly different. We have a lot of interaction because we have such a big affordable housing portfolio. Actually, 30% of our apartments are affordable, which is pretty unique. And so there's a lot of touch points, including on a very micro scale. We have a lot of relationships with the local ANC. We have 2 commissioners on site, and we go to great lengths to make sure that they're aware of it. A project like this is successful only if you have buy-in from the partners. And again, very lucky to have buy-in from the federal and local government. And we baby our relationships a great deal.
And Andrew, in connection with that partnership that's kind of private and public, do you feel like that helped shape the mixed-use nature of the development in a way that helped bring together the success? I mean, sort of like Hudson Yards in New York, you've created an atmosphere where it's live, work, recreation spaces all at once. Do you feel like that's a part of the project's appeal?
Yeah, in fact, that's probably the defining thing about this project that has made it so successful. I mean, I've been working on these mega projects, for my entire, albeit short, 15-year career. And the live, work, play, it's the thing that everyone strives for. You want 18 hours of activity 7 days a week. And I think the Wharf is the best exemplification of that mantra. We are busy during the day with our office tenants, of which, obviously we want them back in the office more often. At night, we have our restaurants and we have our 6,000 person concert hall to drive folks at night. We have 4 hotels on site to drive people here during the weekend. And so and we have, as Alex mentioned, 1,400 units here on site. And so the idea is that we have activity all the time. And that's really what makes it successful. We also have a very, very profitable parking garage, which again is a key component of this, because getting to the site is obviously very important. So everything works together, and we control more or less the entire site. And so we go to great lengths to think about how each use interacts with one another. So when we do a retail lease, we'll think very critically about what office tenants are here, what types of office tenants are here, and what is going to work, what's going to work for our hotel guests, and what's going to work for the people who work at the hotels and the offices, and the people who live here. So literally every decision is made with the other uses in mind, pretty much always. And again, having consolidated ownership, basically effectively being a landlord for everything, allows that to happen.
Sure. It sounds like you really are kind of curating this neighborhood so that each use is sort of symbiotic, and you're not going to have something in the facility that kind of doesn't work or doesn't really make sense in connection with the other uses. I think that's really fascinating, and it does seem like it would be an approach that would help guarantee the success. Can I just ask one question as well? In terms of the marina space, I mean, I think that's something here that really makes the project unique. Was that from day one intended to be a part of the project, or did that kind of develop over time?
No, I think from very early on, the marina was part of the the marinas were part of the development plan. So we self-manage a 218 slip, what we call the Wharf Marina. Uniquely, we have just shy of 100 liveaboards who live on their boats. It's actually one of the largest liveaboard communities on the East Coast. And so they've been here from the beginning, and we partner with them to, they're part of the fabric of the community, and so they were here from the beginning. We're happy to have them as part of the community. So always envision. But actually, in addition to the liveaboard and the Wharf Marina, we also have different offerings. So Capital Yacht Club is like a tenant of ours, and they have a yacht club that they operate. It's actually has been here from before the project existed. And we also operate day docks through a project association that allows boaters who don't have daily or annual slips to be able to park their boat here and enjoy everything the wharf has to offer. So even in the marina space, again, started very early in the early days of planning, and sort of evolved to be this offering that all different types of boaters can appreciate, from the mega yachts, the 200-foot yachts that we have here, to the 200-foot cruise lines that operate in and out of the wharf, down to Joe Boater who decides to park here for a day. So we take a great deal of pride in our marina portfolio. So thank you for asking.
Well, that's fantastic. Can we drill down just a little bit, because you mentioned the parking garage and how that's a big part of how you guys monetize the space. It's a big part of how people obviously get to you. Can you talk a little bit about the tie-in to public transportation a little bit? Because I know, to my knowledge, there's not a metro stop that's right there for you guys. It's close, but it's not right on the property.
Yeah.
How much do you guys sit there and think about how do we get people here via public transit? Maybe do you even know what percentage of people who get onto the property get there using public transportation, and how much does that sort of factor into your thinking?
Actually, I don't know the numbers off the top of my head, but actually it's probably a very large percentage, a vast majority of the people get here by means other than car. But I don't know the numbers off the top of my head. But you make a good point. We're not at the metro, but we do have access to 5 different metro lines and 2 different stations within a 7-minute walk, depending on where you are on site. So L'Enfant Plaza on one end of the site. On the far end of the other side, you're actually pretty close to the waterfront metro station. So 5 metro lines. But one of the things that we did to sort of recognize the fact that you're not actually at metro is that we decided very early to pay for and operate a shuttle bus. So the Southwest shuttle bus hits 2 places at the wharf. We'll go up to L'Enfant Plaza metro station. Then around to L'Enfant Plaza, sort of in the plaza area that everybody sort of thinks of as L'Enfant Plaza, and back to the wharf. Just a 10-minute cycle. And so to the question you were asking earlier, Alex, so many of our workers actually utilize that shuttle bus. And so that was an important part of the early planning of the project. And we're very happy that it continues to be an important part of it. We also have 1,100 bike parking spaces on site, which is a pretty big number. We have a half mile of dedicated bike path that spans half of the site, and we have 4 Capital bike share stations. So again, different ways to get on site, and it's also worth noting that we also have a water taxi service that operates out of the wharf. It's a tenant of ours, and it'll hit places. It'll hit stops in Georgetown, National Harbor, and Alexandria. So that hasn't really played out to be much of a commuter method of transportation, but again, is a way to get to the site. So a lot of different ways to get here, and we encourage people to not have to drive, right? Because you really don't need it.
Well, thanks so much. Appreciate that. Let's get into this to get back to a conversation we started a little earlier. Talk about sort of weathering challenges. Let's start with the pandemic. So obviously, it's February, then into March 2020. The pandemic hits. What do you guys do? What are you thinking at that point? And going over forward over the next couple of months and couple of years, how did the wharf weather the pandemic so successfully?
Yeah, well, that's a good question. the first thing that happened is that we saw our hotel reservations basically go from being effectively full to like empty overnight. And that was like on Friday, March 13th. I remember sitting in the office saying that, knowing that had happened. And so the first thing we had to do was deal with how to keep our hotels open in a way that didn't lose us too much money. And that was some very difficult decisions about staffing that honestly, I think a great deal about today. So like the non-commercial uses were the first one to get hit. Hotels right out of the gate, the garage traffic basically plummeted. And so, NOI was basically non-existent. It became pretty negative pretty quickly. And so, you have to deal with staffing matters. Then came sort of the next flood of issues with retail tenants, because now folks couldn't go to the restaurant, go to our restaurants and retailers. And, I think we stood up what I think is one of the best rent relief programs for retail tenants, like in the city. And again, like through this entire process, I was like communicating with other peers of similar projects. And I think we did something, we stood up a program, and it took a little bit, but we stood up a program that I think was fair to the retailers. They recognized it, and they took some hit and we took some hit, but most of them survived. In fact, we started the pandemic at 91% lease on our retail front, and we're sitting here today and there's the 99% lease. So we're full. And so I think like that's a testament to the success. So that's like immediately what happened. We had to deal with those three issues. Then it became an issue with residential, like a multifamily portfolio. And, there's a period, I think June 1, where like everything started opening up a little bit, and like pretty much overnight we lost like nearly 10% of occupancy, just nearly overnight. And so the next step was to try to buoy our multifamily. And then came sort of the questions from office tenants about rent relief. And so, Heather, you asked a question earlier about sort of the symbiotic nature of our uses. There was always a hypothesis going into this project that if you have a project with all these uses, that like they all offset and work with one another. And even in this black swan event of COVID, where certain, like all uses were affected, like to the extreme levels at one point, they didn't all hit at the same time. And so I didn't have to call any capital to survive this thing, but it took a great deal of work and effort and like allocating liquidity to be able to bolster different uses. But we got out of it partly because it wasn't all impacted at the same time. We're still dealing with some of the legacy of it, but I'm very happy to report that, whether it's retail sales or hotel occupancy or, leasing progress on the commercial front, that we are definitely doing better than pre-pandemic levels. Indeed, last year was a banner year for us in terms of NOI generation. So, again, a lot of work on COVID, and a lot of, I earned some stripes there, but yes, it was a lot of lessons learned.
Yeah, and I guess can you then to talk about sort of I guess let's call what we're in right now the COVID legacy period, right? And we're dealing with commercial real estate market in DC, like I said, facing challenges, right? Back to work struggles in some areas, obviously interest rates being a factor there. What is it that is making you guys successful now? I guess maybe if you could also sort of speak a little bit, what is your take on what's going on in the commercial markets generally across DC, and where you see things going there? So if you could speak, a little bit to the wharf, but a little bit to just generally what you see going on in DC, I think that'd be great.
I mean, the single biggest thing that we as a market need to resolve is the office market, right? Like office values are down pretty significantly, primarily in the class B and C, like the B and C space. But like the cap rates have expanded pretty significantly, even on the good stuff. Like at the Wharf, we have 1 million feet of office. We delivered 500,000 feet 2 years ago, and that's 92% lease. So our trophy stuff is, selling hotcakes. But we're seeing all the traffic, but it's because people are leaving like older product downtown. And so the first thing we need to resolve is our office portfolio. Now, the good news is that now we have the federal government and the local DC government all speaking the same playbook, that like it's time to return to the office. So like, I've got a lot of friends who work for the federal government. I'm a millennial myself, probably the worst millennial out there. And then I'm sitting here advocating very hard for people to come back to work. And that is the first thing that needs to get resolved. And the good news now versus a year ago is that everybody's saying the same thing. Now, whether the federal government and the various agencies actually show up and actually put forth that mandate, that remains to be seen. But the good news is that we're on the right path now, hopefully. But even when people come back, the legacy of COVID and hybrid is going to continue to exist. People will work from home, and even in my workforce, I got 31 employees. We're here 4 days a week. The political winds would not allow me to go 5 days a week, and so I think this hybrid work is going to exist. But even still, the supply of office is too great, and so I think what we're going to see in the next few years is hopefully a correcting of the supply demand dynamics within the office, and it probably most likely means that the B and C product disappears either through conversion, although it remains to be seen how big that will be, or through straight up demolition and redevelopment. And so that probably has to happen in the next 5 years. But once the office market turns around, there's a lot of knock-on effects that we'll see to the positive, right? All the retail that exists at the base of those buildings start becoming more viable. The high street retail in DC is struggling, but once you resolve the office market, that starts returning. On the hospitality front, the hotel front, the numbers are really good top line, but they portend some very interesting concerns. We've been successful on building back our RevPAR, but it's primarily through leisure transient, leisure group. So the leisure stuff is leading the way, but what we're missing here is the corporate demand. And as long as the federal government, the local government, all the contractors that work for them, and frankly the norms of office work in DC go back to something that looks more similar to what it did before the pandemic, we're not going to be able to generate the hospitality demand. So in the good news front, a lot of good movement towards at least talking about returning to the office. We're seeing that in the numbers ourselves, where our offices are full 50 to 60%, 60% occupancy, which is really good if you think about the fact that before the pandemic, 80% was the norm. People are out sick or PTO. And so we're approaching that here at the Wharf. Once the rest of the market in DC gets there, I think we're going to see some really positive effects. But until then, given cap rates, given interest rates, the new supply is going to tamp down. And frankly, we're actually probably going to benefit from that. And I obviously do a lot of thinking about this, but the retail market experienced something very similar in the 2015 timeframe. So in 2015, you see a lot of these retail REITs, their stock price started it's not plummeting, started decreasing, because I think there's a recognition from the market that there's an oversupply of retail, primarily in these regional malls that really didn't have a place in this e-commerce market. And so what we saw over the last 9 years is the right sizing of the retail, the national retail supply, such that retail is one of the strongest performing sectors through, call it from the beginning of the pandemic. And so that sort of repositioning of the office market it will have to happen, but I suspect it will happen soon, and it'll last the next 5 years.
That's what Alex and I have been thinking a lot about. Where is office going to go? How is it going to impact hospitality, retail? Is this whole office to residential conversion movement something that's going to be sustainable, and is it practical? So I certainly understand why you get excited about it, and I think too, circling back to what you say you do at the start of each day, I think the news cycle is getting us more and more information every day that passes about where these things are going to start to shake out. So Alex, I'll throw it back to you if we have any additional questions.
Yeah, so I just to sort of wrap things up, this has been fantastic. Love talking about this. Could talk about it for hours and hours, but let's wrap this one up here with just one last question, if you could. To the extent that you can talk about it, what's next for the Wharf? Do you view the next several years as a period during which, obviously you guys are stabilized now. Do you sort of pause and consolidate on that success? Or do you have new initiatives that you see, around the corner that you anticipate pursuing?
You're right. We're done with the primary construction. So, we put out a couple of $1 billion over the last 10 years, and like that most of that work is done. But there's sort of like, I could call it day two things that we're going to continue to work at. We're seeing the first like lease maturities, like in our commercial front. And so like dealing with those. Thankfully, we've done such a good job of creating this place that like, we're rolling those rents up pretty like significantly. So a lot of like day two stuff that's going to take up a great deal of time. The big thing, obviously, this year, like a lot of other real estate owners out there, is like we have a lot of debt out there. We have $1.5 billion of debt that have very near-term maturities, including like this year. And so, we have to execute on the fundamentals. Debt yield, DSCRs, LTVs, like these are things that we all kind of took for granted in the before the pandemic, and it's becoming increasingly important. So we can't take it for granted. So we work very hard to make sure the fundamentals are strong. Now, once we deal with the debt maturities, I think we feel pretty optimistic that the back half of this year and going into 2025, there's going to be opportunity. Now, again, we're not going to be building new things, but I think there's going to be some interesting opportunities for the partners here in the next couple of years.
Excellent. Well, thanks so much for that. Obviously, can't wait to talk more about it with you in the future. Can't wait to visit the property more in the future, hopefully with my family and other folks, and together with other folks around the DC area. It's just, like I said, it's a great property, and excited to talk to you about it. Well, thank you so much for joining us and sharing your thoughts and your insights about the property and what's going on in the markets generally. Just really appreciate it.
Thank you for listening to this episode of Lay of the Land. To listen to past episodes and receive notices for new episodes, subscribe by searching Hub Talks, that's HUB Talks, in your favorite podcast app. Tune in next time for more real estate industry insights.